Hello and welcome to a special edition of Team English Talks. Now, we're very aware in the English department that you have got 6 weeks without us, you unlucky people. And so what we've decided we're going to do is be very benevolent and, think about how would you spend those 6 weeks, whether you're staff or student. And we're going to recommend some reading based on books that we've read that we've enjoyed and we think that you will enjoy as well. So, I'm Miss Owens and with me I've got Miss Freeze.
Hello.
Mr. Steele.
Hello.
And Mr. Brough.
Hello.
Okay, so we're going to make a start with sort of Key Stage 3 recommendations, starting with maybe sort of Year 7. So we've got one that's coming from Miss Dales, who unfortunately can't be with us today, and she's not dead.
Not dead.
She's not dead. And she was thinking about a good partner text for Refugee Boy, if the Year 7s remember that, or the Year 8s remember it from last year. And she suggested a really good one was the Breadwinner. Okay, and she said it's a remarkable and eye-opening story about the conditions of living under Taliban rule. It's told from the perspective of a young girl, Pavana, during the Taliban occupation of Afghanistan. And Pavana is forced to disguise herself as a boy and become the breadwinner for her family when her father is arrested.
Sounds interesting.
It's such a good book, I love it.
It sounds a bit mature for Year 7, doesn't it?
It does, but it is actually really accessible. I mean, it's great to kind of like get ready for Year 9.
I would say
like,
it feeds into Year 9
yeah,
quite well then,
really nicely.
It? Yeah.
But it's also, it is accessible in terms of if you were preparing for Year 7 or you had just finished Refugee Boy and you wanted to read it. And there's also a gorgeous film of it, really beautifully illustrated film of it.
I didn't know that.
But is there a boy called Alan who loves spaghetti in it? Because otherwise I don't want to know.
No.
Sadly not. Sadly not.
Oh, well.
Unfortunately not.
No.
Maybe she likes spaghetti, we don't know.
I'll just read Refugee Boy
I think
again.
we should just recommend they reread Refugee Boy and leave the podcast there.
What I mean, is no one talking about Windrush Child? Because like that feeds into
That is
Refugee
another-
Boy quite well,
I
doesn't it?
haven't
Yeah.
Yes,
by
Benjamin Zephaniah has another book called Windrush Child,
God rest his
and
soul.
it is
Yeah,
available
bless him.
in bookshops. Let's move on.
Okay. Well, my recommendation for Year 7, and I know that some of them may have read this in Year 5 or 6, is Who Let the Gods Out by Maz Evans. Now, I love anything to do with Greek gods, Greek mythology, and this is basically Greek myths meet modern day. So you've got a boy called Elliot who accidentally, on purpose, releases the god Thanatos, thinking that he can help with his poorly mum, bless her. So there's a bit of sort of serious side to it as well, and releases chaos and potential doom to the world. And the only people that they've got who can stop them is the slightly out of shape and dysfunctional Greek gods. That's when they've stopped arguing amongst themselves. And at the moment, I'm sort of halfway through the book. I'm really enjoying it. I didn't want it to end, and then I realised that actually it's part of a series. So, I'm definitely looking forward to it.
That sounds great.
It is my summer sorted, and it's really accessible. There are some sad parts to it, but it's very, very funny as well. When you have an idea of what Zeus, should look like as the king of the gods, and then he turns up in a Hawaiian shirt with a pot belly. Not quite the same.
We have a lot of students who like Greek gods, don't we? It seems like quite a popular
Very
topic.
accessible, yeah. I think a lot of them come in having read or being interested in reading Percy Jackson, don't they? And that feeds quite well into it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he did a series on the Norse gods as well, but I can't seem to get hold of any of those.
All right,
so
okay.
I know some Year 7s were recommending them last year, but I think definitely, if you like any of the Greek myths, that's probably a good place to start.
I wonder if they still do a lot of that at primary school, because I think that's where I first properly got into like myths and stuff like that was through primary school. I mean, obviously it started with Disney's 1997 Hercules animated film, because that was one of the greatest films of all time.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I wanted them to do, because I've been reading a lot of sort of feminist Greek myths, is to sort of change the narrative around Perseus and Medusa. Because your kids come up to Year 7 and everything like Medusa, she's a horrible monster, and actually no, she's not. She's the kind of victim. It's Perseus that lops her head off and uses it as a weapon.
Well, and that's after what Poseidon did.
Well, yes.
Yeah,
So
she didn't have a great time, did Medusa?
Yeah, so I do think that there is definitely scope for rewriting some of the Greek myths from a modern perspective and perhaps sympathise with the monsters.
Have you read Circe?
Yes.
Madeline Miller, I think.
Yes, that's definitely for older.
Yeah, kind of Key Stage 4
older
or
people.
Key Stage 5. I would really recommend that. That's great. I'm also reading one at the moment called The Wolf Den, which is set in Pompeii and is also kind of like feminist retelling about a woman sold into slavery who becomes a moneylender in Pompeii.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it's about the dog who was chained up. Have you seen it in
Kerberos.
Pompeii?
Oh, no.
I studied the Cambridge Latin course at school. Of course, I know the dog who's chained up.
Oh, this makes me really
Probably
sad,
cut
and
that
everybody
bit.
else as well.
I'm not cutting that bit, Miss Freeze. You need to own what you
I
just
own
said.
the fact that I did Latin at school.
When I was at school, we were lucky to have books.
Yeah. Same. We had the TV rolled out every now and then. We literally wheeled out. So another one that I thought was Chris Priestley. I mean, he's one of my favourite authors. He's wonderful. Uncle Montague's Tales of Terror, and I know that Miss Weston is also a fan of this. So if you're into your sort of gothic, your ghosts, your sort of cautionary tales, it's set in the Victorian era, but it's very accessible to modern readers. So if you think, I'm not particularly a strong reader, it's a group of short stories, so you can dip in and out of it, and often sort of horrible things happen to people, or it's very mysterious, people go missing, there's ghosts. And I just really, I love it as an introduction to things like Dickens and any of the sort of Victorian ghost stories for later on. And then finally...
Sorry, just before you move on to that one, the Uncle Montagues, is that where did we used to do Climb Not? Is that,
we did.
Was
we
that
did
from
as part
that?
of, yes,
I
it
remember
was.
that.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good little story, that.
Yeah.
That's the only part of that I've read. I haven't
Yeah.
read any more of it.
Well, I mean, it's a good cautionary tale, so if you see a sign saying keep off the grass or don't climb this tree, then maybe that's what you need to do, because certainly what happens to this young man
Yeah, it is in that
is
story.
it's
Terrifying.
is not great.
Yeah.
But my final one is by Anne Say Lin, who has written, it's going to be a trilogy, but the first book in it is called Rebel Skies. And it's a fantasy book about a girl, Karara, who gets swept up in a sky battle to hunt down the mighty Shikigami. Now, I've practiced saying that without sounding like I'm going to say something else. I
think you did a great job there.
Which are basically giant pieces of origami that have come to life, and they come to life in all different shapes and sizes. And they're massive, like gigantic animals. And the assumption is that because they're bits of paper, they don't have thoughts and feelings, but then once you delve into it, it becomes a little bit complicated. And, well, let's just say I've never cared so much about bits of paper before in my life. But there's some absolutely fantastic scenes there if you're into your fantasy books.
Sounds great, yeah.
So for me, again, anything else by Frances Hardinge, she is, fantastic in terms of capturing that sort of Victorian essence to the writing as well, and that fantasy element. Writes quite tragically about animals, but very sympathetically. So if you're like me, you don't like anything bad happening to animals, maybe sort of
give that a wide berth.
A couple of those a miss. But, right, Miss Freeze is going to talk us through some for sort of older Key Stage 3 students.
Yes, I am just going to put in for probably more Year 7 age, but just because I love it so much and I got to recommend it, Why the Whales Came, which I put on my reading list, kind of inspired by Rime the Ancient Mariner, by my friend Michael Morpurgo, who I've met. So I claim his friend, on the island of Briar, which is where the book's set, and it's about two children who live on the island along with about kind of 8 other people because it's tiny, and the Birdman, who is kind of a mariner-like figure, and it's just a brilliant, brilliant book, and everyone should read it.
I've never heard of it.
Tell me the whales don't die.
I don't think that there are any actual whales in it. I can't remember why it's called. It's been about 20 years since I read it, but it is brilliant. And Michael Morpurgo still goes to Briar every summer. So
he's great, isn't he? He writes so many books about animals, like Warhorse, and
yeah.
I can't read Warhorse just because it's too sad. But,
it is
but my recommendations for older Key Stage 3, I was thinking about what our Year 9 might enjoy, or kind of Year 8 going into Year 9 to prepare for it, or people who just finished Year 9 who enjoyed some of the things we read. And my picks were 2 kind of inspired by, I might say, or similar in theme to Inspector Calls. One is a book that one of last year's Year 7s lent to me, called Such a Good Liar, which is a kind of modern Inspector Calls. It's about this rich family who have a kind of holiday villa, and I think it's Greek island, and they all, through just kind of general negligence and prejudice, contributed to the death of their working class housekeeper. in a house fire, and then the housekeeper's daughter infiltrates the family to get revenge on them all.
Oh, that sounds good. It's
Sounds
like
like
Revenge
Inspector
of
Calls
Edith
too,
Smith.
Yeah. And it does
That's what
actually
we
kind of, you know, it has the working class woman's voice actually, you know, telling the story. And maybe
As in the woman who died, or the woman who's infiltrated the family?
the daughter. So the daughter is the main protagonist, and she's disguised herself as another posh girl from a different family to go and take revenge.
Oh, nice.
It's a really, really good
I like
thriller.
that, yeah.
Sounds great, yeah.
So thank you very much to my last year's Year 7s for that recommendation. And my other one was The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is set during the 20th century, about kind of the changes that social changes that happened due to the wars and the Depression. It's told by the butler of a very fancy country house owned by an aristocratic family who then fall onto hard times because of the kind of the changes and the social mobility that the 20th century brought about. But it sounds pretty dry, but it's really, really interesting, really beautifully written book. I think if anybody's interested in the kind of historical side of Inspector Calls with the context stuff we do, would really enjoy it. Or anybody who's seen or read Never Let Me Go, a good film with Carey Mulligan, would probably enjoy it too, because it's by the same author. So that would be my recommendation. If you liked Inspector Calls or you want to prepare for it with a bit of historical context, it's a great book.
Yeah, very good.
Oh, wow.
Sounds interesting.
Thank you very much. Right, should we move on to sort of Key Stage 4 and to sort of more meaty, should we say meaty text?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, far be it from me, as Mr. Steele, to start coming in and just talking about old white men. I'm going to go on one of my favourite authors. I'm going to recommend some Stephen King. Now, Stephen King is probably one of the most famous authors in the world, would we agree? But very much well known for his horror writing.
Horror movies.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what I like.
the movies that have been based on his books. So, for example, you will probably all be very aware of It. You'll probably be aware of The Shining. But I'm not recommending those because I don't think any of our school-age children really should be reading them. Maybe if you get into year 11, you'll be fine with them. But actually, no, something a bit different for King actually, because he's well known for his horror writing. But these are much more like fantasy sci-fi writing, which he sort of dips his toe into a few times, but it's really not sort of that really horrific sort of side of things. I mean, there is one of his horror books that I read recently that genuinely has, me and Miss Weston agreed on this, it has the most terrifying passage that I've ever read.
Oh, wow.
We're talking like hairs on the back of your neck kind of standing up thing.
We'll have to borrow that one
but
then.
it's that's called The Outside. That one is very, very good. So the first one I'm going to recommend maybe is definitely year 10 and above. Maybe if you're a confident reader in year 9 as well, you might enjoy it. It's called The Institute. And it's like a dystopian sci-fi novel. It centres around 12-year-old Luke, who is a boy genius, and I'm not going to go into the circumstances of it, but he becomes orphaned, and he's then kidnapped and placed into a facility for telepathic and telekinetic children. And the sort of novel follows the journey of both, like, you know, a little bit like that Lord of the Flies like hierarchy thing within the Institute itself. But then his journey of trying to escape from the Institute as well. It's a fantastic book.
It reminds me a bit of Village of the Damned. Is that what they...
I don't know, I've read that one.
The children all had sort of telekinetic powers.
Yeah.
And ended up taking over or trying to take over.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, yeah. But it's a very engaging book, and it's very sort of like thrilling. There's lots of very good like sequences in it where, you know, you're on the edge of your seat, you know, wanting to can't put the book down. So it's fantastic. I would very much recommend that to anyone who's interested in that sort of thing.
Would you say the reader wants to read on?
The reader definitely wants to read on. Every single line that you read, you're just like, that has just made me want to read on. If anything else, I just want to read on.
In that case, it's a classic.
And then there are other points where I am just shocked. The reader is shocked and wants to read on to find out what's happened. The second King book I'm going to recommend, maybe a little bit older, so probably year 10, 11, and then maybe Key Stage 5, is quite simply called Fairy Tale. which is a bit of a dark fantasy. Follows a 17-year-old protagonist called Charlie, who, through various circumstances, inherits a key to another world, a fairy tale world, but it's a very sort of twisted, dystopian fairy tale world. Sort of think all your sort of fairy kingdoms from Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, all that sort of thing, but turned up to 11 in terms of like its twisted nature. Very, very good. It's like his take on a fairy tale set in the modern age. So it's obviously the sort of nuances of like how modern technology does or doesn't interact with the fairy tale world. It's very, very good. I would recommend it to anybody. I enjoyed it very, very much. And my final recommendation just goes a little bit older, and I'm not going to say that year 10 or 11 should read it because I actually haven't finished it yet. I'm reading a collection of his short stories called You Like It Darker. There's 12 short stories. I've just finished the second one. Very good. Again, there's sort of like he's a master storyteller. I think he's just got such a way with words. But the reason why I'm not sort of recommending it for specifically year 10 or 11 is because I've heard that the next story that I'm starting within that collection, King himself says that he doesn't normally scare himself with what he writes, but he says that writing this next story that I'm just starting is the only thing he's ever written that's scared himself. So
if there's anything that makes you want to...
If there's anything that makes me want to read on, it's that.
It's
definitely
it's Stephen King wants you to read on his own work.
Yeah, I mean, and he definitely wants other people to read his own work and buy it, so he says things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, they're my 3 recommendations. I love Stephen King. He's a great author. If you haven't read any of his work, you definitely should.
Yeah, I love Misery.
Misery's such a
good. Scares me to death.
I mean, the film, like Kathy Bates,
what a film.
She's amazing in that.
Are we not going to mention the made-for-TV classic Bag of Bones starring Callista Flockhart? Who's not... I mean, there were some other Stephen King classics. Anyway.
No, I haven't heard of any of these.
Under the Dome was my first King novel.
Oh yeah, that was a complete flop,
and
wasn't
then
it?
The Simpsons, like,
and the Simpsons version,
the
Simpsons
movie.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
There's so many good Stephen King books, aren't there? Yeah, I mean, The Mist, obviously, that was one of my favourite books as a child.
See, I've only seen the film of that.
Yeah, actually, my one of my favourite King books, I'm not recommending it, but again, brilliant, is called 11/22/63, and it's like about a guy who tries to go back in time to prevent the Kennedy assassination, and like the fallout from that. It's brilliant.
You shouldn't mess with time.
Yeah, no, well, as this man finds out.
Yeah.
And he's an English teacher who like does all this, and it's like, oh yeah.
Oh, that sounds
fun.
It's a brilliant book. It really is. I would recommend it.
English teachers can't leave well alone.
No, that's it. We're always.
I know we should learn from the past, but we never do we?
No, we don't.
We need another inspector, or 2 or 3. Right, Mr. Buff.
Okay, I have picked 2 Stone Cold teenage classics.
So you'd pick Stone Cold then.
No, I've not picked
Leave
Stone Cold.
alone.
No. If you do want to read Stone Cold, you year 9s, a lot of you will get to enjoy that. I've chosen 2 teenage classics. They're both American. And I think they're both books that you really ought to read whilst you're a teenager. They don't ring quite the same once you're an adult. So the first one is a book called The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And this is a book that is taught in pretty much every school in America, in much the same way that pretty much every school in Britain teaches A Christmas Carol. So The Catcher in the Rye. It's about a 16-year-old boy. He goes to a top private school in New York from a very wealthy New York family. And he gets excluded from school one day because he's failing all of his classes and he has a very sort of cocky attitude. And he leaves the family home that night to wander the streets. And the novel takes place over the course of 2 days. And he ends up wandering the streets, staying in a dirty hotel, meeting sort of bums hanging out on the streets and on the subways, and getting himself into all kinds of trouble. And he sort of hates the world. He's quite a sort of, he's a very, very cynical person for 16 years old. He even has grey hair. And the whole point, well, there isn't really a point, but the whole novel is, I think it's great to read when you're a teenager, because so much of what he says, so many of his musings and his ideas, you think to yourself, God, he's so right. He calls everybody...
I feel seen.
He calls everybody a phony, and he says everyone's a faker. And he gets into all these situations that at first seem quite innocent, and then they turn very, very dark very, very quickly. So it's a novel that has a lot of very dark moments in it. So it never gets too bad, but there are a lot of moments where you're sort of cringing as you're reading them. And it does deal with some very adult themes. But yeah, it's not a very long read. It's a fairly short novella. And it's a book that if you read it again as an adult, you see the character in a very different way, in a much more critical way. But if you read it as a teenager, it's much more, it's like Mr. Steele said, you feel seen.
Yeah, definitely.
The second novel I'm suggesting is a more modern one. It's from, I think, the early 2000s. It's called The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Oh.
You read it? Yeah, they made a film of it with Emma Watson. Would not recommend. But yeah,
It's a terrible film.
yeah. Well, the film just trims out about 20 chapters from the book. Anyway, yeah, it's by an author called Stephen Chbosky. The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Don't know how you pronounce his surname, but there you are. And it's one of those books where not a lot really happens. It's one of those books that's just a lot of very rich atmosphere and thought-provoking inner monologue. So I'm not going to say it's a plodding book, because it's not a plodding book. A lot of stuff happens, and a lot of the stuff is, again, quite adult. It does deal with some very dark themes. You've got drugs, sexual awakenings, teenage abortions. It's all very much appropriate for young adults, but there is a lot of quite adult content in there. But anyway, it's about a boy. He's 16. He's quiet, but he has lots of people who care about him. He has friends, he has siblings, he has teachers who all care very much about him. But he's kind of afraid to live his life. He sits on the sidelines at parties. He keeps all of his friends' secrets, but doesn't have any secrets of his own. He keeps all of his feelings very much bottled up. And he sits and watches other people live these big life moments without ever really living his own. And the book is about, I suppose, his journey of self-discovery. He doesn't really want to discover himself, but he's forced to through a series of events involving his friends. And yeah, it's a book that kind of... it feels like it's plodding, but it does lead up to a very dramatic conclusion. And so, yeah, I think that's a good book for anybody who feels that they are a little bit quiet and they feel they aren't always the centre of attention, or they feel that they're not always, the life of the party. So, yeah, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, highly recommended.
I quite like that as well, because if you're walking around with your head in your book, I know that was me a lot of the time. You're noticing other people, aren't you? You're not necessarily sort of being noticed yourself, and that and to have a whole book about that, and become the centre of attention. Ironically,
very much so.
I like that.
Do you think, going back to Catcher in the Rye, do you think it maybe gets a bit of a bad rap because of its connection with Mark Chapman and John Lennon's murder and stuff?
Of course, yeah.
Because he literally just sat on the street after he'd murdered John Lennon and read Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah.
And
I think, to be honest, I was aware of the fact that Chapman cited The Catcher of the Rye as a big inspiration of his, but it's not something I've kept in mind.
No.
I think if you're a Beatles fan, or if you're around during that period, the novel will stick in your head as being associated with that.
And also, I think you've got to remember that that man was unhinged. And that's why he chose to murder someone, not because of a book.
Yeah, I think
Fox
for me,
getting blamed for things, aren't they?
I think what attracted me to the book was the fact that in the early 2000s, a lot of pop culture figures recommended the book. So sort of...
Who wrote Holden Caulfield? Green Day was my first
it was
exposure to it. I was like, who's Holden Caulfield? And they was like, Catcher in the Rye, read it.
Holden Caulfield is the main character of Catcher in the Rye. It was actually Billy Joe Armstrong, the frontman of Green Day, who said in an interview that his favourite book was The Catcher in the Rye. Looking back on that as an adult, I think, come on, dude, you can pick a better book. You are now in your 50s, but you know,
Is that why you decided to read it as well?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that
because
like-
we both
because
decided
of
to
Green
read
Day,
Catcher in the
yeah,
Rye because
yeah.
of Green Day.
But
Oh my
I'd
God.
heard it mentioned by a few pop culture figures around that time.
Is
and
that like one of our year 11s in like 20 years saying that their favourite book is in Inspector
Yeah, oh,
Calls?
you've got to
I
read
read
Inspector
it.
Calls, yeah.
I read it
But that was it.
when I was at
These
school.
people who are very famous, who probably read it when they were in school in the
Yeah.
70s and 80s, I think that it sort of influenced me to read it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those books where if you mention it to any American, you know, they'll know all about it. But I think it's less well known here. But like you say, possibly more associated with John Lennon's murderer. So yeah, read that one. That's a good one.
Well, I had a couple of recommendations from Post 16 students that I was talking to. The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I don't actually know whether it's going to be a series or not. It feels like it should be. But it's centred around a girl called Avery Grams, who is orphaned, not having a great time, sleeping in a car, you know, pretty much about as poor as it can get. And then suddenly she inherits, I think it's $46 billion from a man she's never met. However, she has to sort of deal with his dysfunctional family, a lot of dysfunctional families in these books. And they're very suspicious of her, and it's sort of playing these games to sort of work out, you know, why her, why was she chosen, what are the family up to, that kind of thing. So, you know, I think if you're interested in your whodunits or you're interested in your sort of detective fiction, you know, she's incredibly intelligent. It's very, very well written, sorry, I should say, as well. And I think there are 2 books more, at least. I think it's definitely at least a trilogy. So also at the moment I'm sort of co-reading One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus, which I do know is a Netflix series.
I keep meaning to watch that. Everyone sort of seems to be
Well, the
reading
book
it.
is really, really good because you have each chapter from the different point of view of one of these students. And from their point of view, you think, oh, no, absolutely, you know, there's been a death, there's been a murder of another student, and you just sort of think, oh, they can't have possibly have done it. But it's that whole unreliable narrator, isn't it? You just don't know who's lying to you. So I'm looking forward to finishing that off in the holidays.
Who was that one by?
That's Karen M. McManus.
Oh, Karen. I thought you said Michelle McManus.
Michelle, she's branched out since she won
yeah,
Pop Idol.
yeah. She was a contestant. Was it Pop Idol or the X Factor?
She wasn't just a contestant.
Oh,
She
won
won
it,
it,
didn't she? Yeah.
Pop
Yeah.
Idol, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she's written any books. Karen McManus. Apologies.
Oh, no,
That's
you
probably
just-
the first time she's been mentioned on something that's going to be released on YouTube in about 20 years. So we've just revived her career.
Yeah, I still remember voting for no, it's Gareth Gates. I think
Gareth
I voted
Gates.
for.
Bradford's
You
very
better
own
have done.
Gareth Gates.
Hey, we got robbed. The phone lines didn't work that night.
Well, that's what I heard.
I think a
That's what
lot of
I
our
heard.
kids probably still listen to Gareth Gates.
Yeah.
All these on-the-button pop culture references from the English department.
Yeah.
There we go.
I think probably our homework for the next 6 weeks is to get up to date with what the kids are actually.
Yeah.
Oh, well, as it
Yeah.
happens, I was on Sports Day today, and some of the kids were teaching me the new words.
Okay.
And apparently Riz is a big thing right
Yeah,
now.
Riz.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Riz.
So I'm feeling rizzed up right
Everything
now.
I do in front of my class is either gains me or loses me aura points. So,
Oh, right.
negative
literally
aura.
no idea what any
negative
of this
aura.
is.
It's mostly negative aura.
Negative aura.
Yeah.
Another one, what did you say? Oh, cooking. If somebody's
you got
cooking,
cook-
they're
yeah.
getting on well.
Oh, quite a lot of my
Um,
year 10s came out of the mocks and were like, I have just cooked. I was like, I hope
Yeah.
so. And then I marked it and I'm not going to comment any
And if
further.
somebody's doing really well, you say let him cook or
Yeah.
let her cook.
Maybe they've just turned it
Never
into
heard
like a pejorative. Maybe it's on
Yeah.
the journey. It
Yeah,
started
it's
off
still
positively
cooking. Yeah,
and now it's
that's
going to
it,
end
yeah.
up quite negatively.
Yeah.
Following
so
their mock exams, I don't know.
yeah, are we all rizzed out now?
Is that how that
Absolutely.
word works, is it?
I don't know.
I don't know what it means, but yeah, I think it sounds great.
I think we've all got bags of Riz. is what it
Me
is.
too.
I'm pretty sure, does it not come from charisma?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's what
Does
it
it?
is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like having charisma.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was like end of term vibes or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like
If you've
that.
got Riz, it
Definitely
means you've got to
all
pull
that.
all the
Ah.
members of the opposite sex or same sex. Like
Yeah.
you've got lots of Riz.
Oh, in that case, I'm not feeling particularly rizzed up. I retract that statement.
I mean, I could be horrendously wrong, but I think I'm just.
Yeah, I think it's to
Yeah.
do with flirting.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
we
Lots
can't
of
have
Riz.
any of
But
that.
possibly also just
Absolutely
charm.
not on a Wednesday afternoon.
I can't wait for all of us talking about Riz to be clipped and turned into various things.
Yeah, maybe me.
Right, speaking of bringing things to a close then, we do have some more recommendations on our website, on the Emmanuel College website, if you do want to go and have a look for different year groups, some based on what we will be reading, some based on what you might have read, and just bringing this to a close then. I hope you have a lovely summer, have a well-rested 6 weeks.
Back and ready to work hard in September with all your fresh reading knowledge.
Yes, and we can be back in September as well with our summer reading that we've done that we can recommend for later on.
Oh, is the podcast going to continue next year?
I hope so. I mean, I like to think that at least one person listens to it.
Yeah, well, if people listen, we will do it.
Might be my mum, but
we,
never mind.
We would have to say goodbye to our dear Miss Freeze then.
Yes,
no?
I mean, she's not dying, but she is going to, I would say, a better place, a different place.
That also sounds like she's dying.
To a different school. So
I am, but I will eagerly anticipate new episodes of the podcast next year, and I might come back and guest star if I would be permitted.
Absolutely. Right, take care, and thank you very much to everybody who's taken part, and have a lovely, lovely summer.
Have fun.
Bye.
Bye.